I have stood watch in the Western Archive wing of Aldenmere for 31 years, and in all the time I never once saw a man cry over a box of garden tools. Then I watched Corporal Tomas Rake do exactly that, on a wet Tuesday in March, kneeling in the dirt of a half-demolished wall with a rusted trowel in one hand and something small and gold in the other. It started with the renovation crew. They were tearing out the old garden wall behind the archive, the one that had been sinking into the ground since before either of us was born, and a foundation stone gave way under a pry bar and dropped a man-sized hole into 50 years of packed earth. Inside it, a tin box, waterlogged, half-crushed at one corner, but sealed enough that what was inside had survived. A logbook. A set of hand tools gone to rust and ruin. And a ring, wrapped 3 times over in oilcloth, the cloth gone stiff and brown with age, brittle enough to crack along its folds when Rake finally worked it open with his thumbnail. I was the duty sergeant that morning. Found property protocol is simple, and I have recited it to enough Green Guardsmen to say it in my sleep. You log it. You photograph it. You file it with the household registrar. And 99 times out of 100 it sits in a drawer for the rest of its existence, claimed by no one, because whoever lost it is long since past caring, or long since dead. I expected Rake to log it and move on to his next post check. He is 26 years old, 3 years into his posting, and until that morning I would have told you his discipline was the ordinary kind, correct, unremarkable, the sort that gets a man through inspections and not much further. A good guardsman. Not yet, in my private accounting, a remarkable one. He opened the logbook instead of filing it. That was the first thing that told me something in him had shifted. The handwriting inside was a dead man's, cramped, careful, the ink gone the color of weak tea, the pages swollen and curled from decades in the damp earth. Most of it was nothing of interest: garden inventories, a complaint about frost damage to the rose beds along the south wall, a note about a delivery of lime for the soil that never arrived on schedule. The ordinary record of an ordinary working life. But the last entry, dated the 8th of June, 51 years back, read different. Shorter. The hand less careful, as if it had been written fast, or written by a man whose nerve wasn't steady. *for Mirela. Will give it to her myself, after the gate. If I am not there by evening, tell her I never stopped meaning to come. No surname given for her. No further explanation offered. Just that, and then nothing, the rest of the logbook blank, page after empty page, as if the under-gardener who kept it had simply stopped showing up to fill it in, mid-sentence in the larger story of his own life. "Sergeant," Rake said, still kneeling there with the ring held flat in his palm like it might break, "I want to find out who she was." I told him what I am telling you now, because it was true then and it remains true, that is not our job. We stand a post. We hold a line. We do not go chasing 50-year-old love letters through the bones of a dead man's garden on the household's time. I told him to log the find, file the report, and get himself back to his post before the duty officer came through and noticed his collar had gone crooked kneeling in the dirt. He logged it. He filed it, properly, by the book, every column of the report filled in correct and complete. And then, on his own time, 3 Sundays running, off the clock, out of uniform, on foot through quarters of the city I doubt he'd ever had cause to visit before, he went and did the rest of it anyway. I only know what happened on those Sundays because he told me, evenings after, over tea in the duty room, laying it out piece by piece like a man building a case he needed someone else to believe. He started with the household's old personnel ledgers, the heavy, water-stained volumes nobody requests anymore, because nobody under 60 remembers there's a reason to look. He found the under-gardener's name, Doran Vasca, and behind it his discharge papers, military service before the gardening, a clean record, 2 campaign medals for a border skirmish most people alive today have never heard named. Nothing remarkable about the man, on paper, except for one date, the 9th of June, 51 years back, the morning he had simply stopped showing up to work. No resignation filed. No dismissal recorded. The household registrar of the time had written 3 words in the margin and closed the file, left without notice, the way you close a door, without a second thought, on a man who has stopped mattering enough to chase. He didn't leave, Rake said to me, the second Sunday, his voice low and certain in a way I hadn't heard from him before. He died, Sergeant. There's a city death record from that same week, a man matching his description and his age, found at the bottom of the old quarry stairs near the eastern wall of the city. A head injury, the report says. No identification on him, because he'd left his coat folded on a bench at the garden gate, and his papers were in the coat. Nobody connected the two. Why would they? Nobody was looking for him. The household thought he'd quit and run off. The city thought he was nobody at all. I remember setting my cup down hard enough that the tea jumped. 51 years is a long time to build a case out of a margin note and a date that happened to match. I told him so. I told him men quit posts and vanish all the time, for reasons that have nothing to do with romance, debt, drink, a woman somewhere else entirely, simple cowardice. I told him he was reading a love story into a coincidence because he wanted one to be there. He didn't argue with me. He just opened the folder he'd brought, a real folder, tabbed and ordered, the kind a man builds when he stopped treating something as a hobby, and laid the quarry stairs report next to the discharge papers, side by side, the dates lined up like a man laying two cards face up on a table. Look at the coat, he said. Folded. Not dropped, not torn off in a fall, folded, the way a man folds a coat when he means to come back for it in an hour. You don't fold a coat you're abandoning, Sergeant. You fold a coat you're leaving somewhere safe while you finish a quick errand. I had no answer for that. I still don't. I asked him, plainly, what any of that had to do with a ring found in a garden wall. He was finishing his shift that evening, Rake said. Then he was going to walk across the city and find this Mirela and ask her to marry him. That's what the entry means. After the gate, he never made it. He fell, or he was pushed, or his foot slipped on wet stone, and whoever she was, she spent the rest of her life believing he'd simply vanished. Walked out on her without so much as a word. He said it quiet, but I heard what sat underneath it. Rake's own grandfather had walked out on his grandmother when his father was 4 years old, no note, no goodbye, just gone one ordinary morning and never spoken of again except in the careful, bitter shorthand families use for wounds they've decided not to examine too closely. Rake had grown up on that absence the way some men grow up on a war story, turned over and over, never once resolved. I understood, watching him across the duty room table, exactly why a stranger's ring in a dead man's garden box had put him on his knees in the rain. The third Sunday, he found her. Not Mirela herself, she'd been 60 years dead by then, it turned out, never married, lived out her whole life 2 streets from the house she was born in. But she'd had a younger sister, and the sister had a daughter, and the daughter, 81 years old now, sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, living alone in a narrow row house at the edge of the old quarter with a kettle always on the stove, remembered her Aunt Mirela well enough to talk about her for an entire afternoon. She used to say, the old woman told Rake, once he was finally sitting across from her at the kitchen table with the ring resting in his open palm, that the worst part wasn't that he left. It was that she never knew why. She spent 40 years thinking she must have done something. Said something. Wasn't enough, somehow, for him to stay or even to explain himself. She used to sit out by that old garden gate on Sunday afternoons, for years, just waiting, I think, for an explanation that was never going to come. She poured him more tea he didn't ask for and didn't drink. My mother used to tell me, she went on, that Aunt Mirela kept a chair by the window facing the street, her whole life, even after she was too old to see well enough to use it for anything but waiting. We thought it was sad. A little foolish, even, God forgive us for thinking it. We never once imagined there might be an actual reason behind it, that she wasn't just a woman who never got over a man who didn't want her. She was a woman who never got an answer. She looked at Rake a long moment. You're telling me there was an answer the whole time? It just took 51 years to reach the right door. Rake told me he didn't say anything for a long moment after that. He just set the ring down on the table between them, and beside it the logbook page, photographed and printed clean and sharp, and let her read it for herself in the dead man's own hand. Asterisk for Mirela. Will give it to her myself, after the gate. If I am not there by evening, tell her I never stopped meaning to come, asterisk. She read it through once, and then again, slower. Her hands were shaking by the second time. He didn't leave her, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact finally landing, 60 years overdue. No, Rake said. He died walking to find her. He never stopped meaning to come. He just never got the chance to. She held the ring so tight her knuckles whitened around it, and then she began to cry, not loud, not dramatic, just an old woman's quiet weeping for an aunt she could barely remember, for a family story that had sat wrong and unfinished for 60 years and had, at the very last possible moment, with the last living person who could carry it, finally been set right. That is when I understood why I'd found him kneeling in that garden dirt with his own eyes wet through. He wasn't crying for a stranger. He was crying because somewhere, 50 years late, a question had finally gotten its answer, and because he knew, better than most men his age have any cause to know, exactly how long an unanswered question can sit inside a person and quietly rot. He came back to post that Monday morning the same as he always had. Standing his watch in the archive wing, spine straight, eyes forward, nothing at all in his bearing to suggest he'd spent his 3 Sundays chasing a dead man's last promise across half the city on foot. I stood my own post 20 feet from him that morning and said nothing about it, because there was nothing that needed saying between us. He hadn't done any of it for commendation. There would be none coming. No one above either of us would ever know that the registrar's old, careless line, left without notice, had been quietly, finally corrected, in the household's own records, in Rake's own hand, to read what it should have said all along, 51 years late, died in service, the night before he meant to ask. I am 60 years old now, and I have watched a great many young guardsmen pass through this wing believing that discipline is the part where you simply don't move, the part the public sees, the part that gets photographed by tourists at the gate. Most of them learn, eventually, that the harder discipline is the part where nobody at all is watching, and you do the right thing anyway, for no reward but the rightness of the thing itself. Rake learned that lesson on his own, in 3 stolen Sundays, kneeling in a stranger's overgrown garden for a man he never met and a woman who died years before he was even born. The ring sits with the old woman now, in a drawer beside her window, where she told him she likes to see it catch the morning light. The logbook entry has gone back into the archive, properly filed at last, 51 years and 1 true, finished sentence too late, but not too late for the one person left in the world who still needed to hear it. Rake still stands his post the way he always has. Correct. Unremarkable, if you don't know precisely what to look for in a man's stillness. But I know now what that stillness can carry, when a man chooses to carry it well, on his own time, for no one's eyes but his own. Some promises take 50 years to keep. The man who keeps them anyway, long after every reasonable excuse to let it go has come and gone, is the only kind of soldier I have ever found worth the uniform he wears.